Hello and welcome everybody. My name's Carolyn Mayer and I'm a reader in psychology here at London College of Fashion. I'm so delighted to see you all here and to welcome you to the first seminar of the 2014 Better Life series. This is a continuation of the previous Better Life series, so this is the fourth Better Life series that we've held at London College of Fashion. And this year we're looking at isms in fashion, with the first seminar being on ageism in fashion. And I'm delighted to introduce to you our two speakers, Professor Paul Matz and Dr. Ros Jennings, who are going to speak to you about the effects of ageing in fashion and on our lives. So first of all, I'd like to introduce Professor Paul Matz, who's a visiting professor here at London College of Fashion and at UCL in the School of Pharmacy, and he's a research scientist at Procter & Gamble. So Professor Matz is going to speak to you about the hardwiring of ageing.
Right, well, thank you, Karen, very much indeed. Just bring the lights down a little bit, just so you can see the slides. That'd be fantastic. Well, hello everybody. It's fantastic to be here. I've been teaching in this college for about 17, 18 years, and it feels kind of at home to be here tonight. Although I feel a bit nervous, if I'm being honest. I'm a PhD biologist by training, and Carolyn asked me, would you speak on ageism in fashion? And so I make no pretense tonight. I feel definitely a little bit like a fish out of water, but I want to maybe just provide a little bit of provocation tonight from a biologist's point of view in terms of what I call the hard wiring of ageism. And it is actually my remit to you tonight that to a certain degree the males of our species are hardwired in terms of ageism. So let's start with this rather friendly character here. And we are looking at a modern picture of one of our ancestors, and sometime in the last million to million and a half years, of course, our furry friend here lost his coat, and we now are, as Desmond Morris put it so eloquently, but we're now naked apes. And of course, with this lack of hirsuteness on our body, it actually brings about certain interesting things. So, for example, the fact that mankind quickly discovered that without a covering of fur, he needed to substitute his own fur with the fur and covering of other species to protect himself from abrasion and from ultraviolet radiation, and of course climate, temperature and humidity. But also, it means that we have pressure on us that would not otherwise be there, because as the ultimate mammal alive here on Earth, and we have not just developed bodies with a lack of hair, but also evolution has placed great pressure upon our brains and our minds to help us survive with the incredibly complex social situations that we humans find ourselves in. And it can be argued, I think, effectively that the most costly decisions sometimes in life are finding a partner. And I use the word costly today, maybe in more ways than one in terms of the modern landscape, when we get decisions wrong. And so this process of mate selection has acted upon us, where we have developed certain beauty and aesthetic preferences. But it's interesting that males and females have developed different preferences. And what we see, and I want to stress tonight that everything I'm saying is backed up by a wealth of peer-reviewed publication. It is not Paul Matz's opinion, and if you're interested, please email me afterwards and I can readily supply you with a list of references. What we find is that men pay more attention to physical appearance and signals of youth and health, because these relate directly to fertility and reproductive potential. In fact, I've just done a study that we're going to publish, where we've shown that if you take pictures in young women, not even aged women, across the menstrual cycle, and you take a picture at around day 13 or day 14, which is the approximate time of ovulation, and then a day around day 22, 23, which is called mid-luteal phase, after ovulation, and you show these completely blinded to men, and you say which image looks healthier, then we will always tend to pick the image that was taken around ovulation. So very, very interesting that nature makes skin, makes facial appearance the best precisely when ovulation is taking place. Now again, this is in the literature. Women, in contrast, have developed preferences for so-called high-status males who are able to allocate resource and are likely successful in male competition. So you have this disparity between the drivers of attraction between the male and female sexes. Now, of course, if I was to pick an example, I'd be struggling, but actually Mrs. Merton picked it for me. She famously asked the lovely Debbie McGee, so what first attracted you to the millionaire Paul Daniels? And so we have this, again, disparity between male and female attraction. But is it just possible that this hard wiring in terms of attraction affects this whole aspect of fashion? So I want to, first of all, start with considering something which I've been researching now for 10 years, which is the aspect of skin. So to remind you, once again, we are naked apes, and our skin is continuously on show. And it's somewhat ironic that the skin of the face, whilst being the thinnest anywhere on the body, the stratum corneum, the layer which protects us from the environment on the face, is only 10/1000ths of a millimeter thick on the face, about half the thickness of the rest of the body, and yet it is most on show. And as you'll see, it is most prone to the aging effects of the environment and to chronological aging. So what is the consequence of losing body hair, and indeed hair on the face? There's actually only about 2 studies out there looking at this seriously. And actually, I know these 2 guys based in Australia. They did a study where they took a wig and they placed it on or off this mannequin's head. There's a photoreceptor here which is tuned to the wavelengths of the sun. They used an artificial UV source. I kind of find it amusing that these colours and styles were chosen as they are common hair colours and styles currently seen in the Australian population. I'm not sure about that, mate, but there you go. And what they found was actually that hair, and particularly short brown hair, is worth about SPF 15. Let's call it SPF 15. So it's actually quite a considerable increase in, it's called photoprotective behavior on the skin itself. What does this mean in terms of the aging process? Well, if I had SPF protection for my lifetime afforded by hair, or indeed by a sunscreen, then I wouldn't develop half as many linear invaginations of the skin, in other words, wrinkles and lines, because this is long-term chronic ultraviolet damage to the connective tissue, collagen and elastin in the dermis, where you basically just get simple mechanical failure in areas of repeated flexure around the eyes, the nose and the mouth. I wouldn't get half as many, they're called lentigos, or pigmented spots, which is either it's overproduction of melanin from the melanocytes. And by the way, you also get something called guttate idiopathic hypermelanosis, or white spots to you and me, where you get damage the other way and you get a decrease in production of melanin. You wouldn't get half as many so-called telangiectasia, where often the classic English rose complexion is mistaken for actually what is damaged blood vessel walls, and you basically get pressure building up inside these vessels, and they start to swell until the point you can see them. And so the point I'm making is that without hair on our faces, in certain parts of our body, with age you tend to build up an accumulation of these endpoints, because as Professor Albert Pligman, the great dermatologist, once said, the skin never forgets, and it accumulates damage from ultraviolet radiation. Across the years we've looked at this process in some detail. This is about 15 years old now, one of our early digital imaging rigs, revolutionary at the time, and now it looks rather toyish and embarrassing. But we used this in a very large study of about 4,000 people in different population centers around the world. And this is from Los Angeles, where we had the luxury of 3 different ethnic groups, Caucasian, Hispanic, and African American. And you can see that really across a human lifetime you have this linear accumulation of wrinkles. What's interesting is that you can see that in the African American and Hispanic groups that you have less accumulation of wrinkles, which corresponds to a greater amount of melanin in the skin. So once again, it's showing that without hair, then we are more prone to accumulation of these damaged endpoints. And then if you look at the colour aspects of skin, we have a technique here called cytoscopy, where we can take apart the human face, we can produce a melanin map, a hemoglobin or blood map, and we can start to then explain the features in aging human skin. And if you take a section from the cheek, you can see that this is the melanin distribution, this is the blood distribution. I'm going to use that across a human lifetime. This is a study of 400 people in the UK, and you can see from age 10 to age 70, there is a steady increase. I've called it heterogeneity, which is basically a posh word for unevenness. And so the unevenness of distribution of melanin goes up across a human lifetime. Again, mostly in response to chronic sun damage. What's interesting, it seems to take off almost exponentially here around age 25. I'll come back to the possible significance of that later. And then same thing with blood, a bit more messy because you have here some contribution from puberty, but once again you see increasing unevenness of blood across a human lifetime. Here's the problem when it comes to faces. There is something hardwired into every human being that longs to find faces. We can find faces in landscapes, in the moon. People like to find the face of Jesus in pieces of toast. And in fact, there's a nice website you can go to called Stuff That Looks Like Jesus, if you're interested. But the effect is called, it's a real effect, it's called pareidolia. And again, we are hardwired to find human faces, and babies have this hardwired into them. Here's the first issue in terms of the way in which these kinds of endpoints in human faces affect us. Very controversial paper published in 1972 called What is Beautiful is Good, Beyond, Burchard and Bolster, where they took a range of different images that had previously been rated for attractiveness, and they showed them to different sets of people, and they asked questions like, which person do you think is best suited to be a father, or a mother, or a daughter, or employer, or employee? And you can guess where this is going, can't you? There was a positive correlation between the perceived attractiveness and their worthiness to be a father, a mother, a daughter, and all the rest of it. In other words, we assign different personality traits to those faces that we perceive to be attractive, whether we like it or not. And a way to understand these kinds of effects has come about with the modern science of evolutionary psychology. And the principle here is that whereas the body has evolved under evolutionary pressure, we often forget that in humans, the brain has also evolved to cope, as I said previously, with very complex social situations. And so it's a useful scientific construct to understand some of these phenomena. And across the last 10 years, I think we've published about 13 papers now in the area of understanding facial biology in humans and its effect on perception of age, health, and attractiveness. Our first study was looking at something I talked about earlier, the effect of melanin distribution on perception of age, health, and attractiveness. It was a fun study to run. We basically isolated the skin from 170 women aged 10 to 70, and we then rendered this in a rather nice digital model onto a standard avatar, and then we showed these identical avatars, but for the original skin color distribution, to 400 members of the public, and we then simply asked the question, how old, how attractive, or how healthy do you think this person is? And in terms of age, the subject for tonight, here's the rather interesting conclusion that single variably, based only upon the distribution of colour in human faces, people assign this astonishing linear correlation in terms of perceived age to those faces. Now, going back, of course, the scale is compressed because we're using an avatar of approximately 20 years of age, but you can see that nonetheless there's this astonishing linear relationship. So again, hardwired up here, we have this algorithm that goes looking for unevenness, for contrast, in fact, and we then start assigning age to those features. We went and then found a couple of other interesting things. There's about 5 lectures here. I'm compressing into about 2 minutes. For example, we used eye tracking to show that whereas you might think that we are drawn to more uneven features, it's actually precisely the opposite. We are drawn to more even features because the brain is a very hungry piece of kit from an energy consumption point of view. At any given point in time, it's using about a third of all the energy in our bodies. And so we tend to divert towards low energy, less complex tasks. And so it turns out that the social implication of this is if you walk into a room, our research implies that we would tend to be drawn to the face that has the least contrast. And then what's more interesting again is that we found there's a relative weighting of perception between youth and health, where it turns out that topography, or texture and lines and wrinkles, tends to code more for perception of age, whereas colour evenness tends to code more for perception of health. That's very interesting, by the way, because it means that there's a natural balance of expression of biology and perception of age and health in terms of human faces. But how many people actually know that? How many people go to plastic surgeons and say, make me look better? Does the surgeon truly know that? I would say no. And by the way, 14 million women in the US every year inject their heads with Botox, and whereas that only affects wrinkles and topography, it does nothing for colour evenness. So is it any surprise that do women look a bit younger? I guess so. Do they look a bit weirder? Well, yeah, I guess so too. Because you haven't achieved a balance in terms of these two expressions of age and health. And by the way, when you cover up uneven skin tone with foundation on top of Botox, then it just serves to look even stranger. And so it really is worth understanding there's a natural age-appropriate balance in terms of expression of age and health. Just to bring this home in terms of colour evenness, here we have a reduction in evenness across a human lifetime, and then when we asked the original participants to estimate their total lifetime sun exposure, whether they were age 10 or age 70, we got these three groups falling out very nicely indeed, from low, medium to high sun exposure correlating with the amount of colour unevenness. So it really does appear that our lack of hair as human beings on our faces is driving this effect in terms of the chronic exposure to sunlight. We did a bit of work as well looking at face and body skin. We took pictures of a number of ladies, again, across a wide age range, and then we showed the whole picture, face, chest and arms and hands, and then separately faces and then chests, and then arms and hands to a panel of both male and female judges, a whole range of different ages and types, and published the paper. And what we found was that the face is an incredibly powerful driver in terms of perceived age and perceived attractiveness. In fact, it trumps the effect from the arms and the chest in both cases. In fact, when you combine it all together, it actually drags back up perception of age and drives down perception of attractiveness. So the face is a very powerful piece of non-verbal communication. In fact, our skin speaks long before our mouth does. Now, here's a chart that is completely hypothesis, but I think it's a reasonable hypothesis based on everything I've said so far. So here we have a slide, in fact, you've seen already. This is my slide showing the increase in melanin unevenness on wee naked apes across an average female human lifetime. In fact, this data is from Reading in the UK. So note the point at which we start to see the increase in melanin unevenness. And then if I plot pregnancy rate across that lifetime, you can see that it's interesting that it starts to drop at around about the same time. So could in fact this be evolution building into female human skin, a visible sign in terms of when peak fertility and reproductive potential is starting to drop off? Interesting. I'll leave that with you as something to mull over. So in terms of this concept of aging in ageism in fashion, could male perceptual hardwiring that is genuinely there, we can't argue that it actually is there, be short-circuited by conflicting visual cues from skin condition and clothing? Is there at least partial truth behind terms such as age-inappropriate clothing? Again, I'll leave that one with you. Maybe we can discuss that one afterwards. But having spent 25 years, 26 years in fact this year, working in the skincare industry, one thing is plain to me, without a shadow of a doubt, that similar to the slide I showed you earlier, that if we all took a bit more care in terms of the cumulative dose of ultraviolet radiation we got from the sun across our lifetime, then our skin would not accumulate the same amount of endpoints that would cause a change in terms of age, health, and attractiveness. Let me finish by talking briefly about body shape. This is the other area where we've done a little bit of research and where there's no doubt that this changes with age. And again, this is all published data. So first of all, this is from a sample of just about 9,000 people in the US across some 43, 44 years of life. And it shows a very steady increase in body mass index. That is our weight in kilograms divided by our height in meters squared. Basically, all of us tend to increase in terms of BMI across our lifetime. And that seems to be just the way humans build. What's, I think, more worrying is that this is a recently published paper in 2011, and it shows global trends in BMI across the world in some 9.1 million people. So it's a fairly robust study. So this here is 1985, 1995, 2005. In all of these charts here, you can see different countries, Central Africa, which is flat, unsurprisingly, but here we have North America, for example, and actually most of those curves follow an upward trend. So BMI is increasing across the world, most of the world. If we look in the UK, and we look at the upper end of this scale in terms of obesity and overweightness, and overweight is defined as BMIs between 24.9 and 29.9. Obesity is defined as BMIs above 30. Then you can see that once again, this trend seems to increase across a human lifetime. The last figure to lay on top of this is the fact that we are simply getting older. You can argue that we were never meant to live this long in the first place, and then modern medicine has allowed us to live propensibly longer, and the fact that the UK population is aging at an unprecedented rate, with all the stats that you're probably familiar with. And so you pull this together, and there is this emerging trend that, whether we like it or not, we'll all have to deal with in some way in the years to come. Finally, to bring back in this aspect of evolutionary psychology, this is, again, a large study. 27,000 people took part, and this study showed a positive correlation between increased BMI, actually a negative correlation, I'd say, an increased BMI and a drop in perceived attractiveness. And again, however obvious or unsavory that might seem, this is the result of that study. But actually there's an interesting correlation between, or intersection in terms of effect between the body and the face as well. Because clearly, I know for myself, having lost a bit of weight, I was in my late 30s, I used to have a podgy face, and thank goodness I've lost that because I lost about 2 stone. So as you gain weight across the whole body, your face also takes on weight. This is a study from Dave Perrett, and it shows the effects of facial adiposity or fatness on attractiveness and perceived leadership ability. And so here you have a range of different digitally enhanced facial images corresponding to different BMIs, all the way through from, I think that's 18 through to 26. And what's interesting here is that for females, I mean, this is the optimized, chosen BMI that a wide range of male and female observers looked at and shows in terms of optimized leadership and optimized attractiveness. Look how low it is. It's about 18 or 19. That's right on the edge of underweight. And for males, however unfair this seems, again, here's the effect of this evolutionary legacy. We're way up at 24 for leadership and slightly lower for 23. So there is more forgiveness, unfortunately, for we males. But again, this is the results of the study, and we can't argue with the data. So, as an interesting exercise, I kind of looked at BMI over the last 100 years or so, and almost, the 1910 to 1920, we have the rather fuller, more buxom figures leading to the flapper look in the 20s, and quite a drastic reduction in terms of weight through to the austerity years in the 1940s, and through to the rather post-war glamour of the 1950s and the 1960s, 1970s, 1980s, and the advent of the supermodel, and the rather more voluptuous 90s, and then the rather more worrying trend of the noughties. If you look at average BMI in the UK across that time in the British population, at 25.2 in the 60s, 24.9 in the 70s, 25 in the 80s, 26 in the 90s, and then 27.3 in the noughties, and today it's 28.2. So there's been a very rapid increase proportionally just in the last 2 or 3 decades in terms of what has been the norm across the rest of the last 100 years. And by the way, in terms of the BMI of these figures here, it's remained actually fairly constant. Even Marilyn Monroe was 20.5 in terms of her BMI, kind of interesting. And today, it's not uncommon to have BMIs of much less than 18, about 16 or 17 with some of these very, very thin so-called role models. So this is my daughter, Emily. It's my middle son, Dave. I have a 20-year-old son as well. And so Emily Matz is living in an age characterized by negative self-image and weight dissatisfaction. And you know, my daughter, will she grow up in an age driven by media images promoting thinness, friends and peer pressure, and personal levels of anxiety or depression? So as a father, it's kind of interesting that you know, I have this daughter at age 14, and I'm intensely protective of her. And it's kind of an interesting exercise going through these different pictures and having all the feelings of a father. So in summary, and I'm conscious I'm raising more questions and giving answers tonight, we need, in my opinion, we need healthy role models. We need to halt, certainly, the year-on-year increase in BMI is doing nobody any favours. Certainly from a medical point of view, I'd argue certainly from a self-esteem and others' perception point of view. And then again, I'm asking a question, what is the role of fashion in enhancing and augmenting body shape and promoting positive self-image? So to finish, if I pass on to Ross, it is my remit to you that there simply is ageism in fashion, certainly in terms of the way males perceive females, because it's just hardwired into our brains by evolutionary pressure. And it's my hypothesis that skin, bodies, and clothing can be intelligently and ethically brought to bear to manage this. Thank you for your attention.
Well, thank you very much, Paul. It was very thought-provoking. I'm sure that's generated lots of questions for the discussion. I've certainly got a few.
Okay.
Now I'd like to introduce Dr. Ros Jennings. Ros is the director of the Centre for Women, Ageing and Media, and sorry, I can't see with my glasses on. And she's the deputy director of the European Network of Ageing Studies. And Ros has come here from the University of Gloucester this evening. And Ros's talk is titled "You Wear It Well: Women, Ageing and Late Style Performance."
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any glasses open? No, I'm just using it as a prompt. So. Yeah, I'll put that there. Right. Okay, well, first of all, I want to thank Carolyn for inviting me here to speak in this seminar series. And also I'm just delighted to be back after having spoken at the excellent Mirror Mirror conference in October. I'm moving on to the territory of fashion and pop music. I think I'm going to start with my preferred position on the subject. I'm actually going to let older women speak for themselves, or actually, in this case, sing for themselves at the beginning and at the end of my presentation. So I'm going to be concentrating on Shirley Bassey and Petula Clark.
Beckons you to enter his well of sin, but don't go in. Golden words he will pour in your ear, but his lies can't disguise what you feel. For a golden girl knows when he's kissed her, it's a kiss of death from Mr. Goldfinger. Pretty girl, beware of his heart of gold. His heart is cold. Golden words he will pour in your ear, but his lies can't disguise what you feel. For a golden girl knows when he's kissed her, it's the kiss of death from Mr. Goldfinger. Pretty girl, beware of his heart of gold. His heart is cold. He loves only gold. Only gold. He loves gold. He loves only gold. Only gold. He loves gold.
Shirley Bassey, BBC Electric Proms 2009. Okay, that's my starting point. My current research engages with the ways that pop music is embedded in Western culture and our everyday lives, and in particular how it operates in relations to notions and experiences of ageing. This evening, I want to think through with you the late style of two of the most successful British older women popular music stars, Shirley Bassey and Petula Clark. And I want to examine their performative style strategies as they continue to work in their 70s and their 80s, so their 7th and 8th decade. And I'm basically interested in the different strategies open to older women to negotiate their performance of popular music and how this fashions their performance and appearance. Keeping the pop sensibility and my inclination to pun, because I'm half French, I've taken a phrase from a Rod Stewart song, "You Wear It Well," as a sort of motif to go through this. But I've added a question mark to the end of it. You wear it well? Question mark. Because the focus on the older female star challenges many of the commonly held assumptions shaped by the close connections between pop music, fashion and youth. Now, I want to start by laying out a context. I'm going to concentrate on the UK, but I need to start elsewhere. The arrival of rock and roll in 1950s America marked, as Andy Bennett in his 2012 work, Music, Aging and Style, Growing Old Disgracefully explains, it's the moment when the cultural importance of pop music took hold in the lives of a particular demographic, namely those individuals who were the first to be born into a fully mediatised, fully consumerised Western world. Now, this contributed to and coincided with a shift from the dominance of formality and formal style, which was pervasive in nearly all aspects of society, certainly in the UK, to something that's been described as the shift from ties to jeans. Now, this movement from a time where men wore ties to a time when it was acceptable to wear jeans is part of an emergence of a youth culture that became expressed through the connections between fashion and pop music. And it emphasised a division in interests and tastes and style between generations. It asserted that pop is all about youth and youthful sexuality. And this has been mirrored in academic studies, and particularly until recently in popular music studies themselves. It also reinforced a particular dichotomy. It emphasised the division in interests and tastes and style between generations. It asserted that pop is part of a young versus old model. It reinforced a young versus old model which pitched youth as vitality and old age as decline. A model supported, as Kriebenegg and Meyerhofer in 2003 assert, by the biogerontological medical model of ageing. Now, when you put this together with dominant discourses in Western culture about women and age, and the sort of hardwired facts that Paul's been explaining to us, evidence would suggest that the current constellation of historical, social, cultural and biological perceptions looks at the process of women ageing as mostly problematic, disempowering and thus negative. As Ian Kaplan indicates, women's social positioning to be gazed at may make ageing especially traumatic in relation to the sheer external changes in the human body, which Paul has taken us through very carefully. For women popular music performers who have long careers, ageing is publicly scrutinised. For female popular music stars, there would seem to be a potential for all sorts of kinds of trauma. And the post-menopausal woman is an especially troubling figure in dominant heteronormative discourses, because commonly held conceptions still seem to be closely allied to a Freudian model, which, as Kathleen Woodward explains, there's a struggle to contain the concept of gender as distinct from sexuality. And within this context, therefore, the temptation to produce youthful masquerade, as Anne Basting has called it, is powerful. For instance, Kaplan's analysis of Marlene Dietrich provides a really disturbing, frank example of the extreme care and control that Dietrich took over her image in order to maintain her image and self-image as a glamorous woman when she was giving cabaret performances in her 70s. The article goes into the fact she's wrapping ulcers on her legs, she's hiding things, she's been lit in a particular way because her persona when she goes on stage has to be the one that matches this particular image and self-image of glamour that she's created. And of course, for some, the production of youthful masquerade leads to cosmetic surgery. Now, one female pop star who has been very open about her recourse to plastic surgery is Cher. And Cher, who is now 67, explained in an interview earlier this year, "Everyone says I'm terrified of getting old, but the truth is that in my job, becoming old and becoming extinct are one and the same." So, older female performance evokes a sexist-inflected ageism, one that concentrates on appearance, physical body, style and age appropriacy. As fellow researchers in the Centre for Women, Ageing and Media have done in their work, Christine Gorton and Joanne Gardner-Hansen, they've explored the reactions to Madonna in recent years. And ageing female pop stars with even the most well-managed ageing body provoke responses of disgust, fear and hatred if cultural expectations and norms of femininity are considered to have been transgressed. Now, I'm not denying that male pop stars are pressured to look as young as they can. I mean, how many over 50s pop stars do you know, male pop stars, who have grey hair compared to the sort of national average of men that age? So the pressure is there. But as Brian Inglis has argued, the parameters of what women in popular music could look like and at the same time be successful are already narrow. So if you add age to this, this is an additional pressure on female performers. The two examples that I've chosen to discuss tonight, as I've said, are Shirley Bassey and Petula Clark. And one might argue that with the early development of a glamorous camp style, Shirley Bassey has always been older than her years. And now, actually, she's finally catching up with herself. This also applies to her musical oeuvre, where she has succeeded in taking torch songs, popular covers, and Bond themes, most famously, up the pop charts. But more recently, she's delivered bespoke songs crafted for her and by some of the best contemporary songwriters and performers, from Rufus Wainwright, Gary Barlow, K.T. Tunstall, James D. Bradfield. Petula Clark, on the other hand, has had to work with a star image that's connected to a youthful 1960s set of pop hits, and also the legacy as being the girl next door. And that's actually tricky to negotiate comfortably when you're in your 8th decade. When authenticity rather than masquerade is the performance style, the presumed anxieties of ageing femininity actually, I believe, seem much nearer to the surface. And in the book Rock On, Women, Ageing and Popular Music, which I edited with Abigail Gardner, I explore their differing age performance strategies. So you've seen a hint of the main case study that I've carried out with Shirley Bassey on the electric prom. And I argue that central to Bassey's self-fashioning as an older pop performer is the manipulation of a range of feminist camp practices. As Pamela Robertson states, feminist camp practices challenge the dominant and negative associations of ageing, of gender, of sexuality and performance by constructing a powerful, self-reflexive and actually usually ironic position from which to negotiate identity. And here I suggest that for Bassey, it constitutes a powerful strategy to reject and deflect the traumas associated with the ageing female performer. Bassey's glamorous diva, as you can see, actually has always been a sexually charged one, specialising in the performance of a supremely confident heterosexual femininity. And as she revealed, I think tellingly, in an interview just prior to the electric prom, she is aware of her stage diva presence acutely as a role, one that she takes on and off at the stage door. So it's produced, it's artificial, it is a performance. What the fans get is the authentic diva, never the authentic Bassey. We know very, very little, apart from what's in the media, about Shirley Bassey. Her use of camp is knowingly produced, particularly in relation to her use of excess, clothes, bodily gestures, and the emotion and power of her vocals, and also her awareness of and her onstage warmth towards her huge gay male following. Indeed, on the electric prom, the editing choices made by the television crew actually concentrated almost exclusively on shot reverse shot of Shirley Bassey into the audience to groups of gay men. So, when she first steps on the stage in the electric prom, she's wearing a sparkling, shoulderless silver gown that's split to the thigh. Later in the show, she accessorises it with a long and luxuriant feather boa, even blowing a stray feather to the delighted audience. Now, this is not commonly accepted as age appropriate for the postmenopausal woman, but actually it's de rigueur for her diva persona. She's also not the sylph-like figure of her early career. Her body is not one so frequently circulated in Western media of unrealistic perfection in successful ageing. The inevitable bingo wings, bat wings, as I've heard them described in all sorts of contexts, which are the natural concomitant of age for the average older woman, are not disguised or covered. And as she first walks onto the stage, she extends out her arms wide to receive her audience. If you think in terms of fashion, all the advice we get about covering the tops of our arms, Shirley Bassey chooses not to do that. After more than 50 years in the show business, Bassey is not yet entering Bradshaw's final and tragic state of diva decline through ageing. Bassey is not a masquerade of youthful femininity. She does not deny her age, but she refers to it both through the mise-en-scène, because throughout the set she has a montage of images of her younger self on the screen next to her. And I would argue, actually, when you look at the images of her youth, it's often in her youth where there is the trace of vulnerability. Because now she's accessed the status of the queenly diva, Bassey is demonstrating accumulated power. Power through continued success, power through experience, power in her craft, singing and performance. Her longevity is presented for note and adulation, and the camp irony that she uses takes it seriously and not seriously at the same time. And her choice of music in the concert is also a juxtaposition of past and present. It's carefully constructed. It's the hits plus newer, more autobiographical material. And the hits are not a problem for Bassey because they are not time-coded to a particular period. She specialises in the classic. As the words to the song The Girl from Tiger Bay express, there's no denying who I am. And there's also no attempt to deny what she is now in relation to what she once was. She's saying, look at me now, look at me then. This seems to align with Margaret Gillette's aspiration to be at home in all stages of life. That's one of the things I just find so central to ageing studies and to actually my philosophy. To feel home in all stages of life, to feel comfortable. And I think this is really quite important as it's a powerful indication of pop moving beyond the definitions of youth. Because age is not a spectre that haunts her, but actually a fact of life. She conjures it up, she explores it, she parries it away again. It's like a regal command. I'm looking that, I'm exploring that, I am that, I was that. That is us. We are complex. We are all these things at the same time. And her outward confidence, because actually that's all we can read in these circumstances, in her powerful femininity, seems undiminished with age. She probably has huge anxieties off stage, but she can manage it on stage in a consummate way. She has a comfortable outward relationship with her younger self. And it's no accident that the set list is topped and tailed with her trademark Bond John Barry themes. It starts with Diamonds Are Forever and concludes with what you saw, Goldfinger, because these are the vehicles for her signature powerful vocals. And as she ages, she's learned to manage her voice, her vocal delivery in a consummate way throughout her performance. Because with Bassey, all her performances are based on her ability to deliver powerful vocals that live up to our audience expectations. And she manages her performances scrupulously. She will not, I would argue, overstay her welcome just to keep performing, as many of her contemporaries do. If you think to the Queen's Jubilee concert, Cliff Richard. If you think to the Olympics and the Jubilee concert, Paul McCartney. People who perform but cannot deliver the vocal repertoire that we would expect of them. Now, within the field of ageing studies where I work, ageism is being challenged. As Margaret Gillette indicates, by querying this progress versus decline binary and by interrogating the predominant discourses of age, which, as Kathleen Woodward has argued, wrongly pivots on the blunt binary of young and old, as if there were only two states of age. And one of the more recent and productive perspectives from ageing studies indeed suggests that we are young and old at the same time, or old and young at the same time. We carry different identities and experiences of ageing in us simultaneously. Now, Bassey's performance would seem testament to this approach. By contrast, however, my research into the performance strategies of Petula Clark suggests that crafting her late-style performance is still very much a work in progress. Late style according to Hutchin and Hutchin, is a retrospective, diverse and complex construction with its own critical and ideological take on ageing and creativity. Thus, in addition to the key reference of age and ageing, critical understandings of late style are informed both by the musical and performative oeuvre that has gone before and the contemporary context of reception. In the 2008 Cheltenham concert, where I saw a live Clark performance, I suggest that her younger self ghosts her current self, producing a lack of late style integration in her performances. And certainly, in sections of the performative content, the 60s hit a sense of not being at home or comfortable à la Goulette. 2005, Petula Clark is 67 at this point. 2005, she's 67, and the songs of her life are frozen as songs of her younger life, and her image is frozen as her younger image. And for Clark, tensions appear around the stickiness, to use Basting's notion, of her earlier performance history in relation to her current self. At the Cheltenham concert, she used family-related stories based on the everyday, just to maintain her sort of everyday, ordinary, authentic persona. Bizarrely, though, her repartee was littered with sexualised and risque comments. And that made me really uncomfortable when I was in the audience. And not because she was at that point 76 when I saw her. I'd had no problem with Shirley Bassey doing that, though Shirley Bassey wouldn't. Shirley Bassey does everything with a smile, a nod and a wink. It is camp, not as overt. But I was really uncomfortable because it did not fit with her public star persona that she developed in the 1960s. And in the 1960s, she wasn't just Petula Clark, she was Pet Clark. Pet Clark, a diminutive with all its connotations. Somebody who is the girl next door, not quite grown up. And when Clark became a pop star, however, she was already addressing a continuum and an audience memory of around 20 years, based on growing up in public and cast as the girl next door in films. Clark's hits remain trapped in associations with the past, though they're still played on the radio in the UK, and Clark herself has been largely absent from regular media circulation, certainly since her musical theatre triumphs in the 1980s and 1990s. Her ordinariness as a performative strategy is of course contradictory. That is still a performance. She has led an extraordinary life. But to me, the delivery of her 60s repertoire in Cheltenham displayed the signs of trauma suggested by the likes of Kaplan in older female performers. And this was the result of her own performativity as an ageing woman in relation to a specific genre and its constraints, that is 1960s pop music associated with swinging London. Her chosen stage clothes covered the body in multiple layers of shapeless design, replete with little bows. Now, she was hiding and yet signifying a younger femininity at the same time. And I've got no problem with anybody hiding their body. But I found the hiding of the signifiers of mature feminine heterosexuality actually unsettling because of the way she drew attention to them with overt sexualised gestures. So if you can think of British Music Hall, if you can think of Les Dawson, if you can think of Norman Evans over the garden wall if you're at all old enough, she would adjust her breasts in a sort of music hall style, which was meant to sort of unsettle, it was meant to make you laugh, but made me uncomfortable. She did an impressive 2-hour show, but in the second half, she moved from her 60s hits to songs that she's composed herself. She's written musicals, she's a talented pianist, and she did musical theatre performances. And when performing songs from Sunset Boulevard and Blood Brothers, she performed her narrative characters, Norma Desmond and Mrs. Johnson. And she did that powerfully and convincingly. But she slipped on a coat and became Mrs. Johnson. She took on the persona. So you've got that tension between the authenticity, her ordinary self, and being comfortable in playing a role. She seemed confident in a fictional character. But when she sang her own songs, not the 1960s songs, she actually was moved to dance, and there were moments when she was lost in the music and singing powerfully. These were moments of a mediated authenticity where she entered another performative mode or space, and one that did not actually address the audience. She was lost in what she was doing herself. She was doing something that she loved, and she was also conveying the emotion of it. It was during the music that she loved and the music she wrote that she was actually incredibly compelling. And contrary to established notions of performance, naturalness and ageing, it was the rediscovery of her authenticity in her performance, her feeling at home, that generated both renewal and simultaneous disavowal and honest acceptance of the chronology of ageing. And with it came an energising effect and affect for those who were there. And the experience of this concert, which is why I was really interested in seeing Petula Clark on Jules Holland's 2012 New Year's Eve hootenanny. Because here, contemporary material provided a different kind of late style and performance authenticity for her, and I found it incredibly moving. In this performance, which I'll play for you in a moment, she is ghosted by the future, indeed, possible dementia. And she renders a powerful authenticity in performance, the delivery aligning experience and a comfortable acceptance of ageing in a consummate choice of song.
I remember when I lost my mind. There was something so pleasant about that place. Even your emotions have an echo in so much space, so much space. And when you were out there without care, I was out of touch. But it wasn't because I didn't know enough. No, I just knew too much. That made me crazy. That made me crazy. That made me crazy. Possibly, yeah. When I hope that you are having the time of your life.
The thing about doing pop music, actually I could just play the music and leave you to think about it, and I get invited here to talk around it and you never get quite enough music. Anne Basting asked if stardom somehow catapults the performer beyond the mundane realm of the mortal to the realm of the timeless and the ageless. And I would argue there are moments of performance where the layers of performative construction from the voice, song choice, style of delivery, style of dress work together to make this possible. But unless ageist and sexist discourses are challenged, the talents of women performers will continue to remain subservient to the way they look. And what popular music and cultural theorists are only just beginning to recognise is that while pop music is an intense and formative context for youth, it is also a significant lifelong identity-making resource for the majority of people in the West born since 1950. And this suggests that the strong connection between pop and fashion extends along the life course, and actually it should open up exciting new avenues for design, for self-expression, for self-fashioning, and it should not be providing the source of criticism, shame and anxiety that it currently is. My suggestion is that we need to think with age as a means to engage with talent at all ages. And if we did so, I think we would find a spirit that's more in tune with actually verse 2 of Rod Stewart's song, You Wear It Well. And I sure do want you to know that you wear it well, and there ain't a lady in the land so fine. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Rose. Okay, so that was a really interesting talk as well, Rose, and music. Great.
Thank you.
I hope that both the talks have generated some questions. We're going to have now about 30 minutes for discussion before we have some refreshments. So does anybody have a question to start off the discussion? Okay, Karen, thank you.
Thank you very much to both speakers. I really enjoyed that. I wanted to come back to Paul. There were lots of, I was madly writing down facts and things. I thought that was just very useful to understand the hardwiring. But there was a question for me throughout that where I felt the space in which we were investigating was very egotistically driven by masculine inquiry. And when I think about how we looked at the BMI and the diminishing BMI of the women, we also can look at the intellectual growth and social status of women. And I wonder whether we could match exactly the same kind of journey with masculine fear of powerful women as they begin to explore kind of fuller roles in society, so that it's not really about attractiveness. Well, it clearly is, that's the narrative that men might be hiding behind, but that there is another narrative, certainly for women, and that women don't get an opportunity to engage with, that is, as we become able to have more control in our lives, we are being used, our imagery is being used to massage male fear about what that might involve by reminding us all the time that fertility is our only use, in a way.
There's a lot there, Karen.
Have a go.
Well, I think the word egotistical with this, I was actually hopefully trying to show that...
I don't mean you're egotistical,
No,
I
no.
just mean that all of that discourse out there.
Yes. I think the real point I was trying to make was that however distasteful all that data may have seemed, it is very hard to argue against because of the size of the samples and the controlled nature of the experiments and all the rest of it. And really that there is hardwired through this evolutionary legacy that we males have these kinds of responses, such that we do go looking for this thing called luminance contrast, which basically is the scientific term that covers any discontinuity in the visual field. So I mean, my three children, they have wonderful skin. Actually, my son's the same as me, he's just going through puberty, and he now has acne, which we're trying to deal with. But I remember the feelings at school, when the joke was, what's white with red spots? All mess. What you would laugh. But in here, I'm dying inside because it hits you in your heart. You don't intellectually agree that you have cystic acne. It actually makes an impact on your self-esteem and who and what you are.
Paul, would you mind if I really understand that, and I think that every woman understands the amount of appearance judgment because you experience it the minute you become aware. But I suppose my point is all of this study and all of this information that's being released into kind of public understanding around feminine ageing has all been driven by the desire to understand masculine relationship around, is she up for it, is she shaggable, is she fertile? And yet, where are all these intellectual brains looking at masculine fear of women as we evolve, and somehow providing a counterbalance to perhaps some of the reasoning as to why women are viewed in such sexual, narrow parameters. And I just feel that I'm looking for intellect and study around for it to just not always be in one place around fertility and sexuality for women.
I think, unfortunately, the question is going to the wrong man. I'm a biologist, and so unashamedly, I've showed you my take on the issue. And maybe there's somebody here tonight who can answer Karen's question, because certainly I'm not aware, Karen, of that discourse and that debate. Is there somebody here who can answer the question?
Can I just ask something? Is a lot of that research coming from men? I mean, how many
No.
of those questions are being? I
No.
guess maybe the thing is, are the questions being asked by both genders, or is it just being asked by?
No, certainly not. In fact, the group I work with, mostly in the University of Göttingen, which is a centre of excellence, also the University of Vienna, Bernard Fink and Karl Grammer, two leading lights in English psychology. It's interesting, actually, both their groups are predominantly female, and they study these kinds of endpoints. In fact, we just sponsored a female PhD student who's been answering these kinds of questions. So it's certainly not, in my experience, driven by a male agenda.
But it's why we need cultural criticism.
Yeah.
And it's why it's a responsibility for people who deal with culture to look at this in relation to the way it works in society, the power relations, etc. Because actually, if we just accepted what our bodies are hardwired to do, I think we'd be in extreme chaos. Actually, what we have done as we've evolved as humans is learn to temper that against some intellectual understanding in society of, especially if you become aware of and more knowledgeable. I think being knowledgeable about how bodies work and things is really, really important. But then you've got to temper that with, well, what are the power relations this is working within? Because if we are total creatures of our biology, then it's not saying very much about what we've created as a human society. So I think there's this balance, and I actually thought your presentation was really quite open to the idea that these are the experiments, this is what it's telling us, but actually, I have a daughter, and she's faced with this sort of cultural context of having to manage and negotiate and live with this, and you fear for her. Yeah. And I think that's the way we're living. And I think getting the information, but putting it within a cultural understanding of how power relations work are really important.
Also, your data is unquestionable, and the interpretation also, but evolution hasn't caught up with humans' progress. So a few hundred years ago, I wouldn't be here now.
That's correct.
So we have to challenge evolutionary psychology, and in one sense, yes, it has a place, obviously, and we know that when we're afraid, we have the fight or flight response, and that's come from being afraid that we're going to be attacked by a lion or a tiger, but we're not in those situations anymore, and more than 50% of the population will be over 50 in 20 years' time. And what do we do with these people? So challenging the conceptions that the only reason that women are here is to reproduce or to have sex or to look sexy needs to be something that is really high on the agenda for your daughter and for me, for people. We have a place in society way beyond the years when we may or may not be considered sexy, beautiful, attractive, whatever it is, but pumping out this information that evolution says that we're finished when we're 30 in some instances or 35 in others isn't really helping. Well, we need to be finding ways of challenging these processes. I don't think for a minute that the data there is anything but exactly how it is. But we need to find another way of bringing to the media, to attention, that women over 35, I mean, that isn't old, but in some instances it is, that women who are past their peak in your chart still have a place in society, real value.
I totally agree.
Yeah.
And I totally agree, and I want to be very careful, again, in pointing out, if I haven't done this already, that the data can only answer certain questions. And the data I presented is strictly related to teasing apart why males are attracted to females, and the intense evolutionary pressure that is part of that innate response in males. It can't explain the kinds of questions that Karen asked. It can't explain the kind of points that you made. It doesn't give meaning to females. And so I think all I'm doing is really just trying to provide a modern perspective in terms of trying to understand why we guys find you girls more or less attractive at certain times of the month. And actually, I mean, these are tiny changes. I mean, for example, I'm looking at these two images.
But women do that too. Women at different times of the month find particular males
Yes.
more attractive than others. So
Yes.
the more masculine type, whatever that may be, square jaw, different features that are
Yes.
perceived to be more
Yeah.
masculine are found more attractive at particular times of the
Yes,
month.
you have hard wiring as well,
Yeah.
and so this is perfectly true. So around about day 30, you ladies tend to prefer more robust features in a man's face. In other words, the so-called lover face. And in middle luteal phase, you tend to prefer more gracile, more feminized male faces, the so-called father face, who presumably is more able to care for children, provide resources, and all the rest of it. So each of us sexes have hard wiring built into us that you can test experimentally, and it's a very sound, robust set of results that you can reproduce in different ethnic groups, different geographies across the world. It truly is hardwired, and that's my only point. That you know, the question was ageism in fashion. There's also almost a question like that, and I guess I'm saying, sure, there is, and you know, you have to accept to a certain point that it is there, driven by these legacies.
But I think, sorry, just really quickly, to pick up on Ross's point, where then you need cultural critique.
Yes.
When we agree and accept that it is there and we understand that, we are then still struggling with a very masculine agenda, that is the most important thing. Because, you know, in selling clothes to women, there's an enormous amount of male creatives who are stakeholders in promoting this sexual allure over and above functionality, fit, everything else. Is she shaggable in this dress? That's the bottom line. So that's that space in which, if it is a kind of an evolutionary kind of priority, we are operating in that way without any cultural criticism in media and in marketing. And that's the space in which, unless we have other studies that allow for a kind of broader understanding of value, it's really hard to break out of that space because it's driven as a male imperative at all times.
Yes, I agree.
Thank you.
Yes, I'd still like to continue on this. You've sort of gone into what was my key question, but if there is this evolutionary predisposition, it is only a predisposition, isn't it? It's sort of a small underlying thing. How do learnt cultural behaviours, how do we make them win the day, as it were, rather than ultimately be doomed? And this is where it comes down to you, I think, Ross, and you, Karen. yes, we have to accept they're there, but how do you make learned cultural behaviours win the day?
Oh, if I knew the if I knew the answer to that,
or what are you doing to help?
Yeah, I was going to say, but I think my whole project as a political being, even before I went into education, has been about unthinking and unpicking what people think are normal. And unpicking that sense of binary construction and consensus about men and women. I have lived my life, all my adult life, and actually quite a little of my younger life, somewhere between all these things. And this sort of this hard wiring, I believe, is in there, certainly on lots of levels. But actually, by thinking about who I am in society and who people I know are in relation to the power, the power regime that actually suggests that you are better as this and not good as something else, that this is the ideal woman, that this is the ideal man. I think for me, having some sort of flexibility about unpicking what is taken as common sense. I often say to people, I often say it to my sister-in-laws, it's really quite interesting, why do you wear high heels? Because for them, that's the thought that they will not be able to wear them. It's no, I've not got a problem with it, but for me, I can't conceive of it. And where is the thinking around why you do, why you don't? And I accept totally that's what they want to do, but I say, why are you doing it? And they never have an answer for me. They never have an answer for me.
Because it has evolutionary value.
Yeah, exactly.
But I loved your phrase about cultural challenges. And but it is about saying what some of those challenges are as well, rather than saying, we got it all wrong, we've got to do them. So what are the challenges?
And it's not just the
I know
challenge.
that's what you do as well,
Yeah.
but it's about saying exactly what these things are as well.
And I think when you enmesh the challenges around gender and sexuality with age, gosh, you're going into a really interesting territory. And if you start unpicking those divisions between gender, and you start unpicking those divisions between young and old, and start to think of us somewhere on a continuum as old and young at the same time, you've got, you carry, especially when I work with music, you carry a lot of your younger self with you in relation to music, but actually you experience it differently. So we've got all these competing things going on. We are really complex. And I think because we're really complex, it actually gives me some hope. It gives me some hope. We are not who we are told we are. We are much better than we are told we are. It's just becoming comfortable with that.
Nice phrase.
Okay.
Yes, it's that being told who we are that really, I think, gets to some, well, it gets to me, I'm sure it gets to other people too, to be told that you are that. There is that continuum. Obviously, if you talk about life course, it suggests something that goes on a continuum. Equally with sexuality, a continuum. Equally with political beliefs, a continuum. You are boxed here and boxed there, and there's now in between. But yes, I'm sorry, I like that very much about being told what you are. That really does rile me in particular. Thank you.
I would like to ask both speakers really, how does it fit into better lives? I mean, what do you regard as better? You mentioned Marlene Dietrich. I thought her performance, I saw it, was one of the best things I've ever seen in my life. Extremely artificial, not a happy woman, not someone who really contributed to other people's lives, except from her performance in the theatre. And I just wonder, what are you aiming for in your field when you're talking about better life?
For me, it's about the recognition that, particularly in relation to popular music, that it doesn't end at some weird time before you get to 30, that it is meaningful. And of course there is, this is a whole other spectrum we're going to. Performance is artificial. Naturalness and authenticity as performance is artificial. But it's that emotional connection we build and we take as meaning in our lives, and which will change. So in the book, I discuss this moment where I'm in the car with my father and we're driving across France, and he's going, do you want to put something? This is an 8-track cartridge player, so that dates it, 1970s. And he goes, should we put on Shirley Bassey's greatest hits? This is my father, and I'm going, can we have Kraftwerk on? And in the end, my father, wanting anything for a peaceful life, let me put Kraftwerk on. Okay. Now, these days, I have a sort of emotional attachment. I have that story. I have memories which I take with me. But actually, I play Shirley Bassey much more than I play Kraftwerk. So it's about that. For better lives, we need to think and reflect on the experience of change in our lives, and that some things stay the same but not quite the same, and we carry them with us. And I think popular music has a huge capacity for making better lives. Scientifically, all the work that's been done around dementia, about the alleviation of pain and distress without pharmacological use, means that it's there. But also, I've worked with music therapists. And it's only now, really, that they're stopping going into retirement homes playing Roll Out the Barrel. Because they're starting to realise that the people in the retirement homes are the product of the 1950s rock and roll generation. And actually, they're probably, in the end, of course, if you've got control of your environment and things are meaningful to you and you take them and they're recognised as important, it makes a huge difference. So I think better lives is that connection.
So, Terence, excellent question. The happiest people I've met in my life are people that like themselves. And I think for me, there's things that we can do to help like ourselves better. Again, I come back to my last slide. In the context of the talk tonight, I chose 3 things. I chose skin, I chose body, and I chose clothing. And I'm suggesting there's 3 things here that we can do to help ourselves like ourselves more. I've spent 26 years in the skincare business. I've worked on brands like Olay and Max Factor and CoverGirl and all the rest of it. I spent a lot of time, and by the way, this is quite intimidating, if sitting in front of an audience of largely women tonight. I spent a lot of time with women, again, seeing the profound effect that skin condition can have on quality of life and self-esteem. And so relatively small changes in skin condition can make the world of difference to somebody, both in what we call normal, everyday living. But also, again, it's interesting that the question comes from Terence, because Terence is a retired professor of dermatology at Oxford University, an expert in his own right, introduced me to the world of skincare in developing countries about 6-7 years ago, and since then I've been profoundly affected by the way in which skin condition plays a role in self-esteem in the developing world. Because let's face it, we have an appalling record as a race in terms of putting people outside city walls because they look slightly different from the rest of us. And so managing everyday skin condition is one thing. I think making a change in skin condition for people unfortunate enough to have skin disease that makes up about half of all disease in the developing world reported at primary health centres is actually a profound thing that we can offer to the world. And then again, I was raising questions tonight in terms of what is the role of fashion in promoting better body awareness and better body image, which is a huge emerging problem that we have to deal with in some shape or form today. What is the role of managing weight, whether it is gaining weight to fall inside the normal range of 18.5 plus, or reducing weight to fall inside the 25.1 threshold? What is the role of these strategies in driving self-worth and self-esteem? So that's my answer to your question, Terence. I think it's about strategies to help us like ourselves more, suggesting that skin, body, and clothing are potential tools in our armoury.
I would just like to add to that, for the people whose skin can't be helped by creams or by some surface, I would say adornment, but that's not what I mean, some cream to help. It's not possible for all skin conditions to be able to promote an image that isn't based on a single ideal, such as perfect skin or a perfect body.
Anti-aging.
Yeah. Or anti-aging products that promote the idea that we have to fight the aging process, which is the natural process. So, and also I agree absolutely with the weight because it's a health issue. But if some appearance of skin is not a health risk or is not detrimental to health, then accepting that people don't all look the same or don't all have the same skin. I think for me that is the ethos of the Better Lives, promoting a more diverse range of what's accepted as beautiful, as normal, or as everybody is. I think that's massively important.
I noticed that there's been quite a lot of, I mean, we're a largely female audience, so there's been quite a lot of focus on the sort of ageism / sexism aspect of it. But I'd like to sort of counter that, and it kind of runs both ways. I've got an 18-year-old brother who's almost completely bald. He suffers from male pattern baldness, and that's something that haunts him every day, and that's not something that he can do anything about. There's not a cream. I mean, there's treatments, but he'd have to spend a fortune doing that. And I think it's very easy for us, or for myself specifically, as a female, to look at, you know, society and fashion and think that's only something that affects women, but it's not. Absolutely. And I think that there's a lot of pressure on him. He'll walk into a bar, he looks about 45, and you know, that's something that runs completely the other way. He's not afraid of becoming older. He's not worried about aging. There's a total flip reverse on it, and I think that's also something. You know, you see the Justin Biebers of the world, who's his same age, with a full, you know, floppy fringe and all this and that. For males, there's the same pressure there. We also have you know, a hard wiring towards what we think is attractive, and it also puts the same pressure on men as much as women, and I think it's quite easy to forget about that side of it, especially when you're talking in reference to fashion, but it's the same kind of thing, and I think that's something that probably comes into the better lives as well. You've got to address it on balance.
Absolutely.
Yeah, totally agree. I mean, I've spent time working on brands like Clearasil, like Gillette, coming into very close contact with a bunch of guys who have worries about they have too much hair, too little hair on their face, on different parts of their body, on their scalps. And then acne, again, not just on their face, but on their shoulders, on their back, afraid to take their clothes off in the swimming pool, in bed, and all the rest of it. So, yeah, you raise...
But this is a problem with a scopic society. This is a problem with a society that looks and where people are... I mean, I understand, you know, the basis that it is part of evolution, etc., but surely, if we're all thinking there's injustices here for a young man, an older woman, it's based around the fact you're not valued for who you are. It's about valued for what you look like. And there's the shift to do anything about that is, you know, it's a big shift to change that, because actually we've internalised all these anxieties. I've, for all my bravado, have internalised all these anxieties too. I just choose to treat them in a different way, but they're there. They're there from the second we're born, as you say.
Okay, we've got one more question.
Yeah, I've listened to sort of like all the different views, and it's interesting what you say, because the hardwiring bit, personally, I believe that it is only a very small part, and it's the fashion industry, the media, it's all these things that we're bombarded with every single day, every journey we take. Doesn't it all start here in this room that we make a decision right now? I don't think fashion will ever try to dictate to the normal person what normal is. So fashion, the people who control fashion or anything, they'll never do anything for me as a person of my age, you know, doing what I'm doing. In terms of the hardwiring and in terms of fertility and sexuality and all the rest of it, let's face it, the average couples, you know, may go away and have maybe 2 or 3 kids or things like that. So the sexual thing and the shagging thing and all the rest of it, it's only a very small bit of what we're doing on a day-to-day basis. In terms of the heels, oh, Roz, I'd love to put the heels on, you know, just have a bit of a sashing. And don't we all have our Shirley Bassey things? Don't we all want to be Shirley Bassey for a little bit, put on the glad rags, the frock, and belt one out? I tell you what, you know, the karaoke bars and everything would suggest that we probably do. So I think it all starts.
Actually, whatever sex we are as well, I can attest to that. My recent holiday in Gran Canaria.
But the thing is, in terms of acceptance, in terms of building people's self-esteem and everything that goes with it, that starts with you inside yourself right now and being the individual that actually accepts everybody around you when you see them, no matter what their skin condition is, no matter what their hair condition is or anything, and takes it for the being inside. And that's just where you have to start. And if everybody did that and ignored all the big adverts and all the millions that spend on marketing, maybe we'd have a different view of everything that goes on day by day.
Thank you.
Well, you know, Susan Sontag in 1972 or thereabouts put it very succinctly. She said that what the photograph has done, it has made us judge by the image, by what people look like rather than what they are. And we are surrounded nowadays everywhere by images. And as an image maker, I'm very concerned with this, that the dominant image is of the smooth skin, which has been photoshopped usually to look like that, or using special lens, rather than seeing people as they are naturally. We're going to have creams that, you know, help us deal with sun or deal with things. Why not somebody of our age as the advertising model, rather than the 20 or 18 or 17 something who is advertising an anti-aging cream, who at that time doesn't really have a problem. Do you know what I mean? And this is what I find as an image maker I'm very concerned about, and that I'm trying, in my own practice, I'm trying to work against by imaging older women and making them realise that they can look great in a photograph with all their wrinkles and their lines and their blotchy skin, and that the personality comes out of that photo, of the portrait. And I think that's part of the problem nowadays.
Okay.
The images we see all the time.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you to everybody for questions. Thank you to Paul Matz and to Ros Jennings for excellent.